Hi everyone, it's Roya. I hope you are doing great, and as always, it's an honor to have you by my side. As probably some of you know, my access to the internet and VPN is currently neither easy nor normal. I'm facing significant limitations in this regard. Therefore, the videos you are currently watching were created based on the information and images that I could access over the past 4 months through limited and non-systematic searches, given the internet difficulties I have been facing. However, despite these limitations in access to information and visual materials, I still found certain elements that, in my opinion, could be highly significant and potentially play a significant role in this case. Thus, considering how difficult it was for me to research, prepare, and create this video, I hope that the very important points raised in it will be considered by relevant experts and qualified professionals or members of the defense team, and in case they find merit in my reasoning and determine that these observations are valid, I hope they may be able to use them most effectively and constructively possible. Without further ado, I want to get straight to the point. When I first saw this photo of Kaylee's room 2 months ago, a particular part of the image caught my attention, which was this area, and as you can see, this area appears to have a greenish halo or tint over it. In other words, it looks as though this portion of the image may have been edited with some kind of green filter. Anyone with the least knowledge of color basics or color physics knows that each primary color has its own complementary color. When a complementary color is added to a primary color, it neutralizes the primary color, significantly changing its visual properties. This process pushes the color toward a chromatic gray, which is different from the neutral gray created by simply mixing black and white. To clarify the concept, I prepared these images for you. In the images, the primary colors are yellow, blue, and red. You can also see that the complementary colors of blue are orange, the complementary colors of yellow are purple, and the complementary colors of red are green. And please pay special attention to how the combination of each primary color with its complementary color affects the result, especially the combination of green and red. Since a green filter appears to have been used in this photo, I was concerned about its effect on neutralizing the red color, and this means that placing a green filter over the image could suppress and neutralize red tones that may potentially be indicative of blood. As a result, I became more focused on this area and tried to eliminate the greenish filter as much as possible. And I'll walk you through the details of this process and the conclusion in just a few moments. But it should be added that, while doing so, I unexpectedly noticed another significant detail that strengthened my belief in the presence of a pool of blood in this area. It appeared that there had been an attempt to conceal it, trying to make it look like a shadow. This new factor that reinforced my belief that this was not a shadow, but a pool of blood, was the distribution pattern itself. The way it spreads across the floor separates it from the visual characteristics typically associated with a shadow, despite the apparent attempt to make it appear as one. So let me explain everything I found in this regard, in detail. But first, I want to highlight several details in this image that will be relevant later in this process, and ensure that they are carefully noted. As you know, this is a photo from Kaylee's room after the incident. Please pay attention to Murphy's position under the table, his snout, his eye, and his paw. Also, as you can see, there is absolutely no curve or bend in the lower section of this rolling cart, and the bar at the very bottom appears straight and perfectly linear. And now, let's move on to the analysis of the section where a green filter appears to have been applied to the image. As a first step, I attempted to reduce what appeared to be a green filter in this area as much as possible. Following this effort, I obtained approximately 70 images, and here I'm presenting only the ones that appeared clearer and more defined. And the darkest area visible beneath the table and the rolling cart, near the wall, which may at first glance appear to be a shadow, seems to me more consistent with a pool of blood. Also, while I was working on removing the green tint, I noticed that the boundary between what appears to be a shadow and the parts of the wooden floor that do not have this dark coloration is not a boundary that can be reasonably explained by the physics of light and shadow. Which means, in fact, as the second factor that convinced me this darker region, the area beneath the table and close to the wall, could be blood rather than a shadow, it was the very pattern and shape of this darkened area that stood out to me. As we all know, according to the laws of physics, light travels in straight lines, and whenever an object blocks the path of light and prevents it from reaching a surface, a shadow forms behind that object. Because of that, the resulting shadow should logically correspond to the shape and geometry of the object creating it, which means that objects with rounded, curved, or circular forms tend to cast shadows that reflect those same kinds of contours, whereas objects made up of straight, rigid, and non-curved lines produce shadows that correspond to their own structural form. With that in mind, you may recall that I mentioned earlier that we do not see any rounded or curved structures in the lower sections of the rolling cart itself. However, paying closer attention to this area, you can see the darker region beneath the rolling cart, which at first glance could easily be mistaken for a shadow, displayed precisely those kinds of curves and irregular contours, while we have no curved or arched object to block the light direction in this area, which consequently led to such a shape of shadow to be formed at all. In fact, it was these curved, scalloped-like edges beneath the basket area that led me to conclude that this was likely not a shadow at all, but potentially pooled blood instead. Which appears to be an attempt was made to wipe away the portion that was plainly visible and extended beyond the edge of the basket. That would explain the irregular shape that was left behind. To make this region and its edges more visible and easier to recognize, I examined the image under multiple contrast settings so that the boundary and separation of this area would become much more pronounced, allowing you to see and understand the point I am referring to. I also want to draw your attention to one important point. Please do not focus on the coloring or the specific colors you are seeing in these images. The only purpose here is to increase the contrast so that the boundaries, patterns, and shapes of the areas in question become more visible and distinguishable. Another observation that further reinforced my belief that this was blood rather than a shadow was the placement of Murphy's paw within this darkened surface area. If you look carefully, Murphy's paw appears to be surrounded by this darker region from virtually all sides. In other words, we can see that this darkened area extends almost completely around the paw. Logically, this becomes difficult to reconcile with the idea of a shadow. If this were truly a shadow, there would necessarily have to be a specific direction of light creating it. As we discussed earlier, shadows form when light is obstructed by the object, creating an area of darkness. But if darkness appears to surround Murphy's paw from nearly every direction, then where exactly would the light source have been to produce such a shadow pattern? Once again, to make my point clearer, I will show you this part of the image in different adjustments. When I came to this realization, it became understandable to me why the curtain in Kaylee's room appeared the way it does in the image, looking obviously new, freshly unpacked, and recently hung. As you can see, the curtain clearly looks newly opened, and even the fold lines left from the packaging have not been ironed out or relaxed yet. It looked as though it had just come straight out of the factory packaging, brand new, and then was immediately hung up. Because of this, it also became understandable to me why there is a strong possibility that the struggle may have occurred inside Kaylee's room, and that Kaylee may have first been attacked there. Just as it appeared that someone had been searching through things in Zana's room, leaving the closet disturbed. The same, or even worse, may have happened in Kaylee's room as well. In my opinion, this curtain itself could potentially indicate that it was added to this part of the room after the building's reconstruction, when the new version of the crime scene was recreated. During that same period, when the building was supposedly being cleaned of hazardous chemicals, a time frame which is better to be called as tampered with the evidence time frame. Only imagine that under such an excuse and time frame as cleaning the house of hazardous chemicals, and under such clothing, couldn't it be possible that anyone, even the killers themselves, have entered the house to create the new version of the crime scene and make it ready for further crime scene's new version of photos? Frame time for taking new photos from the newly reconstructed crime scene. In fact, a photo like this one is nothing other than an unconscious confession and admission of tampering with the crime scene's evidence and staging it, which they are disclosing proudly instead of being more cautious about it. But there is an important thing I have learned in my life, that not all confession released through a person's tongue, but whatever is released through their behavior, could even be more significant or crucial. Of course, this was not the only reason that caused me to think that Kaylee might have been attacked in her own room. As many of you probably already know, I believe the Idaho incident might have happened over significant amounts of drug substances with considerable financial value that had allegedly been kept by Kaylee and Zana, who were allegedly unwilling to return them to the original suppliers. Therefore, it is not surprising to me that worse than what happened to Zana's closet might have happened to Kaylee's, which caused the recreators of the reconstructed crime scene to hang up this new curtain in this area. There was no logical reason to photograph this specific part of the scene, or even to move the chair aside in order to expose the area beneath the desk. In my opinion, the only explanation is that they knew exactly what had originally been there, that this area had previously been covered in blood, and that certain tricks, or visual manipulations, were used to make the blood appear like a shadow before recreating their staged crime scene. To me, it's like a child who suddenly blurts out, "I didn't eat the cookies," before anyone even asks. However, chocolate all over their face says something else. I genuinely hope that someone from the defense team, someone at the FBI, Dr. Turvey, or any qualified expert involved in this field, eventually comes across this video, even by chance, and takes a closer look at the points I am raising here. Because if the FBI, with all the resources and forensic capabilities at its disposal, were able to establish the presence of blood in the location I have identified, the implications could be enormous. In my view, it would fundamentally change the narrative of what happened inside that house. As I have said before, I personally suspect that a separate attacker may have confronted each of the 4 victims. The reason is simple. The risk involved in controlling 4 individuals inside that house would have been extraordinarily high for a smaller number of offenders. In fact, I think it is more plausible that there were at least as many attackers as victims rather than fewer. The perpetrators would not have wanted to allow any victim to escape, call for help, or disrupt whatever plan they had in place. Dear viewers, I want to repeat once again that I have reached information that I believe is highly valuable. However, at the moment, I am unable to upload it, and I also do not have the ability to produce videos because of the current internet situation on my end. And as soon as these issues are resolved and conditions return to normal, I will upload all the information I have gained, which, at least in my view, is very valuable and encouraging. I only ask once again that you please make sure this video reaches the attention of the defense team. I hope it will help.